Okay, let's shift over to a new segment here and talk about trauma and what healing from trauma is, what we can do about it, because it's not just going to heal itself in most cases, because that's not how the nervous system works, that's not how the brain works. We're geared for survival, and we've got all this tacit information in our heads about what's been dangerous in the past, and we're hanging on to it because we don't want to be in danger again. So how do you deal with that? The good news is that the brain is malleable. There is some brain plasticity, neuroplasticity, which means that there's some rewiring that's possible. So that's cool, and that's actually news. I mean, years ago they thought whatever your problems were in childhood, you're stuck with that. But how many of you experienced a little bit of shift when you did the baby wrap yesterday? Like, didn't that feel different in your body to get held and told those things? So you do have new experiences that overlay on old experiences, and your brain doesn't know the difference, you know? Your brain is putting these in all together. Some of the memory storage systems are a little sloppy that way. So you can have new experiences that are healing. Okay? Let's talk about this idea of what trauma is and what to do about it. There are several books that have come out. In the last couple decades, there's been a lot of research on trauma. And one that you might be familiar with is Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Knows the Score. Another one is Eric Gentry, called Forward Facing Trauma Therapy. And another one that you may not know about is Pete Walker, Complex PSD, From Surviving to Thriving. And that's one that's written to the layperson. It's not a professional training book, but it's a really great book that's written to anyone. And he uses the term emotional flashback to refer to what you might call triggers and panic attacks and so forth, emotional flashbacks. And there's an article that's on my website from him on that. But anyway, the nervous system has basically two parts, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, and they work together. The parasympathetic can be broken down into a couple more parts, but I don't want to get too technical today. Let's just say that you have part of you that is designed to gear up and take care of business when necessary for survival. You get adrenaline and cortisol when you think that there's something that you need to respond to take care of yourself. And then you also have the parasympathetic response, which somebody named Harold Benson wrote a book about years ago called The Relaxation Response. And that's a whole system in your body for relaxing and doing things that need to be done, like digesting your food, growing cells, and also part of that is also relational, social, the way that we respond to other people and connect. So there's and also sexual arousal and you notice you can't become sexually functional if you're very anxious or geared up. You know, you don't tell your penis to get hard. So you have these two complementary systems, and they have to work together depending on what's needed. You're writing that down, aren't you? She writes down all the weird things I say and puts them online. Oh my God! What are you?
Follow her on Twitter. That's going on Twitter. It's going on
Well, all right then. Just to be fair, you also can't tell yourself to get wet. All right. To be fair. These are not prefrontal cortex processes. Yeah. I mean, I do a certain amount of sex therapy. I work with couples. And sex therapy starts with learning to relax, honestly, because your body really has to just be in the present and relax. You can't just be ruminating about the past or worrying about the future and what kind of performance you're doing. You can't be doing all that stuff in your head. You need to be in your body, and you need to relax your body, and then your body will start cooperating a little bit more. All right. So, Van der Kolk, I've actually done some pretty thorough training with both Van der Kolk and Gentry, and these guys it's just amazing, really great. I have one of the books here if anybody wants to look at it. This is Eric Gentry. Anyway, this is a drawing from Van der Kolk and talking about our process here, and what we're after really is balance between the neurological systems, right, in order to function. But then we have disruptions, and these would be when you're triggered, when your brain is confused about what's past and present, because the information is stored there, and you've got your implicit and your explicit memory, and they honestly get mixed up when you have some kind of stimulus that reminds you of something that you've been through in the past, and you want to protect yourself, so that you have this disruption, and then the next thing that you can have, this is like a model for healing from trauma. The next thing that you have is awareness to be able to stop. The first part of interrupting the traumatic kind of PTSD response is to stop. Just to stop action. Okay, freeze. In my book, I talk about freeze frame, where you stop and pay attention to what's going on. And that's a little bit counterintuitive, because the fight or flight response is so immediate. So the biggest skill that you can learn, and you can go home now, you've gotten everything out of the weekend, is just to learn to stop and pause and relax and interrupt the process. But that's when you then get awareness about what is going on and practice some of the skills that you have available to you to deal with it. Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So that's what we have to learn. And trauma is when you're facing a perceived threat to the system in a state of relative helplessness. When you don't really know how to respond, and you can't respond. We were talking about that yesterday a little bit. What can you think of in your religious past that would qualify for this? And what we're talking about here is CPSD, complex PTSD, where you have repeated examples of the same kind of trauma over and over again. So when we get to this stage, we have some skills that we can use, and some ways of practicing these skills without being in the situation, so that you are building it up and have that available in your behavioral repertoire when the time calls. If you think about things that you went through as a child that were traumatic, when I say traumatic, and it's defined as perceiving threat and serious threat while feeling helpless, we're not just talking about things like being physically beaten, right? Or sexually molested. That's what's different about this whole area of religious trauma syndrome, in that I'm considering ideas to be violent and toxic. Okay? And I think that's what's not recognized in the mental health field, that religion can actually be damaging on this mental, emotional level in some very, very serious ways. So when you talk to somebody who hasn't been through it, and you were saying that, and you try to explain some of the things that you were taught, and they say, oh, well, can't you just leave that in the past? Can't you just get over that? Kind of like not believing in Santa Claus kind of thing, where you leave the ideas behind. No, it's deeper than that, because when you are told something, you also experience the imagery of what you're being told, and your body experiences it. So you get told that if you're bad, you're going to go to hell. You imagine that, right? And your brain often mixes up what you imagine and what you actually experience. So when you imagine hell over and over again, it's as if you've been burned over and over again. I have an adult client that I've worked with for years now who struggles with panic attacks every time something is really hot. Like if he burns his finger, he told me he burned his finger taking a pizza out of the oven and just went into a full panic attack. So, you have to appreciate the power of your brain, not just with the physical things that get enacted, but also what you can imagine and you've been told. And don't they try to make it really real?
Oh, yeah. There was pictures, videos, they had it all.
And the description of what a bad person you are, what a guilty worm, to tell little children. And people who try to respond, like if you're witnessing to someone and they don't necessarily buy it, they feel like they're a pretty good person, you end up trying to convince them, like, well, haven't you ever told a lie? Or haven't you ever not been totally truthful? Or haven't you ever used something that's not yours? And the definition, what's the definition of sin? Isn't it falling short? Falling short of the glory of God. Oh my God. Well, doesn't that just cover shit all? Nobody's perfect, right? So nobody's perfect gets translated into everybody deserves to go to hell. And like I said, with developmental issues, little children don't know the difference, and they'll buy into this. And did anybody see the Wordless Book? Do you know what that is? The Wordless Book is this little book that's just got colors, and it's for small children, pre-literary. So all it does is have colors, and you can explain to an extremely small child that can barely talk that the black page is for black sin, and this is your heart. Oh. And then the red page is Jesus' blood.
Yeah, we had the bracelets.
The bracelet, literally.
The beads.
This is a common PBS type thing. Yep.
So you have it as a constant reminder.
And then the gold page is the gold of heaven. And the white page is the purity of your heart after you've accepted Jesus. So this whole book is just colors. And it's got the most evil ideas right there in this little color book.
Sorry, heaving.
You're heaving?
I'm heaving.
Then the green is the new growth.
Oh, and green is the new growth in Christ. Yeah, it ends with green.
Is that a co-opting of the thinking hats?
I don't think so, but it's certainly co-opting the power of your brain to use imagery, and colors. Because, again, that communicates so directly. And this is the thing about what I've said about the amygdala and the way that your brain processes imagery. And imagery, by that I mean all sorts of input, like visual, all sensory input directly. and your brain is like the first stop for processing all this imagery, and it's more immediate and it's more connected to emotion. Something that I find lacking in some of the trauma work actually is their appreciation of imagery. I learned to do clinical guided imagery many years ago, and I do it a lot because you can go down to a relaxed state and work with the images that you've got in your head and move the furniture around a little bit in a way that's so powerful, that's different from trying to talk yourself into thinking differently. Okay? So that's why I consider the Wordless Book to be evil. Here's this evil little book here. Let's look at it. Right? Oh.
But the child is going to have that in their mind the rest of their life. Anytime they see red, it's like, oh, red means blood.
Yeah.
Oh, black is my, evil heart. They may not, that's just all subconscious, but they're going to always associate those colors.
And when you get taught these ideas, you get taught these ideas in terms of interpretation that are very different from what you might think about from a secular point of view, like blood. The blood of Jesus, covered by the blood of Jesus. I mean, think about that. Right? Mm. Or that God, in his infinite love, sent his son to suffer and die for you.
Because he loves you so much.
And what was always interesting to me is they carry around the murder weapon.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, here's the murder weapon. Like if you had a family member shot with a gun, would you wear a gun around your neck?
Yeah. Super straight.
That's how you remember him.
Yeah, that's how you remember him.
Yeah.
Here's a gun.
Yeah. It's a matter of death, not his life.
Yeah, like you were part of it, so you're reminded.
So a child reaching, I mean, how old were you when some of you that got this from birth, how old were you when you think that you got saved?
Oh,
4.
3,
5.
6,
5.
4, yeah.
7 or 8.
Okay. A lot of people will say 4 or 5 because, and I think developmentally, that's when you can put things together a little bit logically, as cause and effect. You can understand that more. And you can also understand culpability. You can understand guilt and fault. And you have the beginnings of empathy. So this poor man suffering on this cross, you can feel bad about that. I remember at the age of 5 sobbing in a church service, where we had this guest speaker who was talking about it. And then finally getting that it was my fault. So you get the empathy to feel bad for Jesus' suffering. You get the fault thing, and you get the cause and effect thing, all gradually maturing in this child's mind to where you can get them. And so all this stuff of child evangelism, which it just blows me away as being an evil project, is the matter of getting them when you can, getting them young, when you can convince them of these things. But they just have those cognitive abilities to do that. I mean, nobody said 2, right? You're too young for that. 3 is still a little young, but 4 or 5, you're able to do these things. But if you really, and people will say they accepted Jesus and they're happy, and and parents can get all happy about what happened with their kid. But keep asking them. Go ahead and ask them more about the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny, and see if they don't just go on and talk about those in the same vein. They're buying everything that they get convinced of. This magical thinking is very real. So I feel like with my introducing the idea of religious trauma syndrome, I called it trauma syndrome because I think that these ideas are equally harmful, equally damaging as physical effects. And that's what I think has been missing from the mental health community, is understanding how much we can be affected by what we're taught, and that our bodies can lodge these things and not even realize it. So that when you're talking about your religious training in your past, some of you are having trouble thinking of examples of when you were traumatized because nobody said it was that. Nobody called it that.
Even like with labeling it, like talking to friends or family members and actually labeling it as religious trauma syndrome is really hard because you feel like it's like you're, I don't know, like they're not going to understand, and it feels so dramatic, and they're like, a trauma? Like what?
Yeah.
I find that very hard. Even like telling people coming here, like it's a religious trauma retreat, like I wouldn't use that word. I wouldn't say it's a religious trauma retreat because I feel like, like kind of, like they just wouldn't understand it. Like
It feels like
religious trauma.
blaming, I think. You know, it feels like blaming to me. Like if I said that to my mom, like she would think that I was trying to blame her and make her feel like she did something wrong, where she feels like she was trying to do the best she could.
Right.
But I think it's helpful as an internal idea.
But what we're doing here, as being truly devastatingly harmful. I mean, what is it if somebody decades later can't feel good about himself? You know, you were taught that you're basically bad, right? And so, how do you heal from that? You can be a very high functioning person, you know, successful in business, family life, whatever, but still remain with this feeling of not being okay. Because that's what you were convinced of.
Using the word trauma feels almost like guilty because it's like not physical. And so sometimes even like labeling it, it's like, well, how do I label this as traumatic? When physically I was fine, I was in a safe environment with my parents. And so it's like recovering from like even attaching that it is trauma. I think is a huge thing for the mental community to be able to see and understand.
Yeah,
because my mom has said, well, it's not like you were sexually abused. It's not like you were physically abused. And then that just shuts me down. I'm like, what can I say then?
You was mentally abused.
Yeah.
Like I do now.
And we're just talking, I mean, today I've been emphasizing a couple of things. One is the fear, and another is the degraded sense of self. So you've got this huge damage to your identity. I mean, when you're a full-on Christian, you're just a Christian, right? You're not really a person or somebody with a life. You're so identifying with being a good Christian, like getting an award for it, right? And so when you lose that, you're stuck with figuring out who you are. I mean, talk about damage. And then you start, and when I started writing this book and exploring all the different areas of damage, I said, oh my God, then there's damage to relationships, right? You don't know how to relate to people. You don't know how to even view people except as objects. You don't know how to feel your feelings. You don't know how to think with critical thinking. You don't know how to relate to the world. The world is this dangerous, evil place. You don't know how to enjoy yourself. You don't know how to participate in the world as if you live here. You know, how do you care about the environment? There's so many areas that are damaged. Okay? So I think it's fair enough to call it religious trauma syndrome.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm a poster child for it. It's like, and then when I go into the counseling, then I'm getting the labels. I have borderline personality disorder.
Yeah.
I'm bipolar. And then I'm like, well, shit, you know, but now I don't feel like I'm any of those things. I feel like this is what caused that. This is what I'm struggling with, you know, getting healing from it. I'm like, I'm not bipolar.
Yeah.
So Gentry said a couple of things in this workshop that I thought were great. One is that when you look at the past and you're looking at what happened, it's a fact-finding mission. It's not a fault-finding mission. Okay? It's not your fault. It's not really anybody's fault because those people that were involved, they were also brainwashed and indoctrinated too, right? They're very damaged people. But it's a fact-finding mission, and the facts are important because what are you doing? You're bringing up some of these implicit memories into explicit, into your narrative memory, forming a narrative, a story about what you've been through so that you can understand. It's like what I was saying with adopting a child, you know, you're adopting your inner child, and the child has been through some stuff. And what if a social worker dropped off the child and you didn't want to know anything about it? You know, you didn't want to blame anyone. So therefore, you're totally ignorant about what this kid has been through. Maybe this kid's from Rwanda, you know. It might be helpful to know that their parents got killed. You know, it's helpful to know what happened. So how about in the relationship that you have with yourself, with your child? Instead of blaming, you have what? Compassion. Okay. Yeah, I'm fishing for compassion here. Compassion. No, for everything else you're saying is also really important. But your healing from trauma is going to depend on developing compassion for yourself. You can't be looking at what happened. Oh yeah, well, I bought into this religion, stupid me. You have to stop doing that, you know, because that wasn't your doing. You're not stupid. What you did in reaction to that was coping. You developed coping and surviving. And another thing that Gentry says is that CPSD is simply an over-adaptation to your trauma. I mean, you're getting triggered and you're reacting, you're trying to protect yourself because of what you've been through. It's not an illness. And in fact, he goes so far as to say, you know, once you've learned some of these skills, once you've had some psychoeducation, which is what we're doing at the moment, and then you work on some skills, you learn some skills, anybody can support you and coach you. What you need is coaching at that point. You don't necessarily need a therapist in the formal sense. What you need is support in practicing your skills and rewiring your brain to respond to situations differently. Because you don't need a whole bunch of diagnosis if you understand some of this.
It's true. I got to that point with my therapist. She's great, but I was kind of like, I'm kind of done here. I'm just...
Like that symptom checklist I gave you. I mean, that's an enormous list. What if, you know, we were going to come up from all these diagnoses and stick them on you, you know? That's not going to help you. That's just going to make you feel bad about yourself. Say, oh, well, I've got clinical depression. Therefore, I'm going to be depressed today. You know, like it's something that's stuck to you. No, you're having some depressive symptoms, but they are explainable. So understanding is not about blaming. It's not about fault finding. It's fact finding, and it helps. And so remember yesterday I was saying people say things like, "Oh, I beat myself up. Or I'm my own worst enemy." Well, you know, and it's interesting to me in psychology where there's a lot of study of negative self-talk, right? And irrational beliefs or negative core beliefs and things like that. But there's this huge absence of figuring out where these fucking beliefs came from. You know, how come so many people in the population feel like they're not okay? And it actually goes beyond church-going, Bible-believing Christians. It goes beyond that because the religion has permeated cultural ideas as well. You know, to think that we're all basically bad and sinful. And when, certain political party I won't mention, you know, that treats people like they need to be controlled, because if they're not controlled, they're going to do bad things, because that's what human nature is. When people talk about that's human nature, when someone's done something awful, selfish, like we're all just basically bad. We get taught that in lots of ways. And in fact, there's a lot of scientific research on that. Are we basically bad? It turns out we do a lot of things, and other species do a lot of things that are cooperative, that are altruistic, because we need each other, and we actually survive better when we help each other. And we have concrete evidence for that. That's not just a nice idea. If you notice what happens, it's really beautiful what happens in disaster situations. The way people rise to the occasion. It's pretty inspiring, pretty cool. And then, I don't want to get all sociological on you, but a lot of the problems and issues we have are structural, are systemic, right? Like capitalism, imperialism, patriarchy, blah, blah, blah.
The negative self-talk and positive self-talk is, it also really impacts obviously what you think you can do, but also what you're just able to do. Mm-hmm. And I see a huge difference in my students with how they're approaching an assignment or how they're approaching a test and how they think about themselves going into it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a huge disservice of our education system, which most of us were brought up in, is like, you need to pass this test to be a good student. If you don't, you're a bad student, and then you're afraid about the next test. Mm-hmm. But you can see it in their bodies if they're like, I don't know, this is going to be really hard, versus this is going to be hard, I've done hard things before, I can do this. Mm-hmm. Like their bodies change. Yeah. And I think that's incredibly strategic in both directions.
And so part of an interesting thing, when you're out of the religious worldview, you can take into account areas of knowledge that we have, like evolution and evolutionary psychology, to understand some things about our psychology that are based in our evolutionary past. And here's an example. It's much easier to worry about a negative outcome than it is to have a positive hope about it. Why is that? Why are we alert to danger and prepared for negative things? Right? And so scientists will tell you that we're actually wired for survival. We're not wired for happiness. We're not really wired for happiness, because evolution takes millions of years, right? And our bodies are still wired in the way that Cro-Magnon bodies were. So we're alert to danger. We tend to expect negativity and prepare for it, because that's how we survived. Not necessarily thinking that we're bad, but expecting to deal with problems. And so we in our modern day really do have to work with ourselves, work with our minds and bodies, to not necessarily have that expectation all the time or have that reaction all the time to situations. We actually have to learn some other patterns and work with ourselves. So what I like about knowing that is that you can be less blaming of yourself. Like, oh, there I go being negative again. Well, forgive yourself for that, because that's a really natural thing. Another very natural thing is to worry what other people think. People are, oh, I'm such a people pleaser, or I should worry less about what other people think. Well, you know what? You needed to do that because you were in a tribe, and the tribe needed to think well of each other and work together to survive. And if somebody was being a total maverick, like alerting the predator that they were there, the tribe couldn't cope with that. You needed to be concerned about what everybody thinks about everyone else. And so if you were doing something that was wrong and dangerous to the tribe, shame was something that was used. And shame is used to help control people that are doing things that are dangerous. So don't be so concerned if you're worried about what other people think. That's normal. What you can do is be conscious of it and then work with it to know that you're not necessarily in danger. So that's basically what we're doing when we're talking about PTSD or CPT. I'll just call it C. So when you're feeling CPL, you have to do what? What's the first thing you do? This is a test. Huh? Mm-hmm. Starting with what? Time out. Stop. Time out. Okay. So your boss says something critical to you and your body goes rigid. What's going on? Somebody in authority says something critical to you.
Your brain is trying to figure out whether this is the past or the future or present, pulling from the past.
Yeah, so the first thing that you're doing is you're going to stop and you're going to assess the threat. Assess the danger, right? This is what's different from what you're evolutionarily wired to do. Because you're evolutionarily wired to fight or flight or freeze, one of those. And yet you have some other options in your modern life. And so you can stop. You're not necessarily going to die. The feeling your body has is that you might die. Somebody criticizes you and you think you're going to die, right? We say that. But think about it for a second. Like right now, in this room, sitting here with me, are you safe? Are you safe? Okay, you're safe. So that's what you can do when you're in a situation that's scary to you, threatening to you, is first of all, notice where you are. I'm here right now in this situation, and I'm actually not in danger. I'm not going to die. I'm safe. And then you open up that space that Frankel talked about between stimulus and response. And so there are some skills available. Later, probably, later this afternoon and tomorrow, we'll talk about some foundational skills. Foundational skills would be things like living a healthy lifestyle, eating well, sleeping, getting exercise, taking care of yourself, and all aspects of self-care. Also mental hygiene, confronting some of the crappy ideas you've been taught and replacing them with new ideas, doing some of that work that's in my book about, the monster talk and what it needs to be, confronting it and what it needs to be replaced with. If those were core assumptions you had, then maybe they need to be actively rejected and replaced with new ideas, and doing some of that background foundational work of where you're going to be coming from. The other thing that we're going to do is clarify some values and develop an honor code that you have with yourself about how you want to be. How do you want to be if you don't just want to be in reaction all the time? So those are like foundational skills. But what are some of the immediate things that you can do when you stop action? Stop action is a film term, but
You mentioned ground yourself.
yeah.
Notice.
Yep. Grounding. So that's like the sensory recruitment.
Notice what's happening in your body.
Okay. Right. So that's called interoception. And interoception is considered to be, in a lot of this material that's being developed, to be the key to healing from trauma. And that is the ability to notice what's going on inside you, so that it's not just what is going on outside, like maybe somebody's criticizing you, and that's like an external event, and you have this sensory input, and it can be anything. A trigger is basically sensory input that is getting confused with your implicit memory.
Do those feelings ever go away? Like you're in this, or you get triggered, and your body's vibrating and shaking. You're aware of it. You know why it's happening. There's nothing you can do about it.
No,
Does it get less and less as time goes by? Just by being aware of it, or is it always there?
No, that's where we're getting to right now. That's what we're getting to right now. What we want to do is we want to engage the parasympathetic nervous system and let the sympathetic nervous system back off, because you're getting flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. And that's good if you need to get out of the street if there's a bus coming, right? You need that surge. You need to, the way Gentry calls it, being jacked up. You need being jacked up if you need to do something immediately. But what if you're not? What if that's not what's happening and you want to have other responses? What if you don't want to just yell at your boss in a defensive sort of way, right? So the interoception is when you go in, like Laura was saying, and figure out what's going on inside you. So we've practiced some relaxation techniques and focusing, which is, okay, what's going on with my heart, my breathing? How does my muscle feel in my legs? And notice one thing that's actually really kind of cool is to, if you want to do it quickly, notice your feet, feel your feet. You know, that really changes your focus of attention if you focus on your feet. So somebody's yelling at you and you're thinking about your feet. But so interoception takes you in, and then you're able to relax your body, and you haven't got all the blood drained from your brain. Because, like I said, when you're jacked up, your prefrontal cortex is not functioning the same way, is not functioning as well. Your rational thought is not up to par. You're not able to consciously make a choice about what to do next. And everybody's had this experience, right? You react in anger, you react with running away, you cry, you do things that are just in reaction. And so what we're talking about here is intentionality instead of reactivity. Intentionality is when you're acting in a way that fits your own values. You're being who you want to be. So let's try something here. Let's try some interoception as a technique. Let's say that you're just going to practice going inside for now, and then I'll add something. But for right now, you can go, just close your eyes, relax your body, feel your feet, breathe. Focusing on your breath is another part of it. But you can do a body scan, starting from the top of your head, and you can imagine that white light I've talked about flowing down through your body and soothing and relaxing all your muscles. Another technique is called wet noodle, where you just let your whole body go limp. You're not going to hold on to anything. You're just going to let go. You feel safe and secure. Yeah, give me a hand signal when you feel like your body is relaxed and you're ready to go on. Okay, now I want you to imagine a low-level, small threat, something that would feel problematic but not a real big deal. Imagine that and imagine responding to it in however way you want. And when you're done with that, you can take a deep breath, move your arms and legs around a little bit, and come back here. Open your eyes. What was that like?
Even just imagining that threat, the small, like, it wasn't even, it was just abstract. It was so easy to notice. Like, my breath stopped. It went, like, into, like, and then to be able to be in that place to be like, oh, that is so immediate of what my body is doing, and then I have to be able to relax it again. It was surprising.
I felt it in my throat, like something had jabbed my throat. The moment you said it, it felt like something was like right in there, a jab. Like not painful, just like pressure.
And then what happened?
I was shocked because I felt it right away. And I was like, wow, that feels familiar. Like that's, I think, happening more often than I realize. And then I realized, okay, feel the feet again, feel my feet. And once I felt my feet, I felt safely.
Okay.
I find it helpful. It's a tiny bit cheesy, but I do actually feel sometimes like a little force field around me, and I think that's partly about having my boundaries, and like I know that I can use my voice if somebody really gets into my space, either intellectually or emotionally or physically, but to feel like a tiny bit of a deflection zone so that I can still be safe in my space and they can be angry at me, but it doesn't all get all the way into me.
So one point that you're making is that once if you're calm, you can think about how you want to respond. You can say to this person, I think I need to take 5 to think about this before I respond to you. Or you can take any kind of action, you can respond, but it's and so like there's another whole world of learning communication skills and learning things that you can do to make your life effective. But the point is that you have a chance. You have a chance in hell of responding in the way that you want to respond, that are based on who you want to be, and not just in reaction. So what happens when you're having nightmares and flashbacks? Your brain is trying to integrate past and present and trying to heal. Okay, don't feel guilty for having nightmares. It's the different parts of your implicit and explicit memory that are trying to integrate. But all these painful learnings are stored, in your amygdala. There's another word, amygdala. I always misspell. It's hard to spell too. Oh, okay. So a trigger. This is from Gentry. Is nothing more than a sound, a smell, a sight, or some other sensory input that our threat response system interprets as a sign of imminent danger associated with past painful learning.